In America, there's a specific category of 24-hour family-style restaurants that serve a variety of traditional diner foods but specialize in breakfast. I know, very specific. The three biggest chains within this category, and honestly the only three major ones that fall into it so perfectly, are IHOP, Denny's, and Waffle House. Three extremely similar restaurants with some distinct differences. In this video, I want to get straight to the point by comparing these restaurants in 10 key areas, starting out with their size. Based on system-wide sales, Technomic ranks all three of them in the top 50 restaurants in the country. IHOP at 32 with over $3.3 billion in annual sales, followed by Denny's at 39 with $2.6 billion, and Waffle House trailing at 49 with just under $1.5 billion. However, if we measure the number of locations, Waffle House is actually the leader with over 2,000 of them, but we have to consider that the average Waffle House building is significantly smaller than the other two, typically able to seat less than half as many people. So when we look at sales per location, Waffle House falls even further behind, but Denny's actually pulls ahead of IHOP. So the biggest of these three chains changes based on what metric you're using to measure it. Related to size, I also want to look at the geography of these restaurants. IHOP and Denny's were both started in Southern California, Toluca Lake and Lakewood respectively, which are both in the Los Angeles area. And even though they have both expanded into almost every state around the country, their biggest presence has always remained in California. Now, Waffle House is a very different story. It started in Avondale Estates, Georgia, near Atlanta, practically across the country, and has always been perceived as a Southern restaurant. You know, the whole friendly Southern hospitality thing is a big part of their identity, so they have been much less aggressive in expanding across the country. Today, they are only found in 25 states and remain completely absent from some of the country's biggest markets, like New York and California. As far as I can tell, they have not even tried to enter a new state in well over a decade, so they seem to be content sticking to their own region where they are practically part of the Southern culture. Next up, I want to take a quick look at the 24-hour aspect, because to this day, it may be the biggest thing that separates them from other restaurants. You know, if it is 1 in the morning and you are looking for something to eat, these are going to be some of your most reliable options, and the same goes for holidays. These are some of the only restaurants out there that literally never close. Waffle House has been doing it from the beginning. Denny's actually started out as a donut shop before transitioning into a coffee shop to serve the employees of a nearby factory that was operating different shifts over a 24-hour period, so that is when they made the transition. While IHOP also started out with more typical hours, but made the transition more gradually to accommodate late-night travelers, leading me to the next comparison, highways. See, all three of these restaurants started out with one location in the 1950s, right when construction was starting on the interstate highway system. By the 1960s, all of them started franchising, with most of the locations being built along these new highways. They would even try to find creative ways to attract the driver's attention. Waffle House and Denny's would put up these giant bright yellow signs, while IHOP would have these distinctively shaped blue roofs that were seemingly inspired by the distinctive orange roofs of Howard Johnson's that were also trying to attract attention from the side of the road. Next up, I want to focus a little more on the franchising of these restaurants. As I said, they all started doing it in the 1960s as a way to expand and open new locations along the highway without needing to find the capital to do it. To be clear, it is other people opening and operating the restaurant, so it is just easier to make it happen. Today, IHOP and Denny's claim to be almost entirely franchised. It looks like 99% and 96% respectively, while again, Waffle House is the one that stands out. While they still have a franchising program in place, the majority of locations are owned by the company, and they say that franchise opportunities are not offered to the general public, which is not surprising. Waffle House is comparatively more concerned with uniformity between the restaurants and delivering a pleasant customer experience, and a smaller, stricter franchising program is a good way to keep control over all of it. Alright, next up on the list, just because I think it is funny, I want to compare deceptive names. For IHOP, IHOP, it is really the I in International House of Pancakes that may be a little misleading. I guess it is meant to reflect the fact that they serve some international breakfast items, but they mainly focus on American food and are found mainly in America. Today, something like 95% of those 1,700 locations are in fact in the United States. Now, with Denny's, you would really assume it was started by someone named Denny, right? Well, no, there is no Denny. It was started by a guy named Harold Butler alongside Richard Jezak. When it was initially a donut shop, they thought that the name Danny's Donuts would be catchy, and when they transitioned into a coffee shop, Danny was changed to Denny to avoid naming confusion with the competing coffee shop nearby. So not quite what you would expect there either. For Waffle House, I guess you could argue that it is not actually a house, but that would be a stretch, so I'm declaring very minimal deception in their name. Here's another unique comparison: the founders leaving the company. Over at Denny's, the founder, Harold Butler, was trying to expand the business into unexpected directions. Most notably, in the early 1970s, he tried to acquire Caesar's Palace, a popular hotel and casino in Las Vegas. Well, simply put, he went about it in a sketchy way where all the shareholders were not given the same information. The SEC took issue with it, the public was upset, and in the end, he ended up leaving his position and sold his stock for $3 million. Now, remarkably, Al Lapin Jr., the primary founder of IHOP, has a shockingly similar story. In the early 1970s, around that same time period, he too was trying to expand the company into unexpected directions. They ended up with over 20 subsidiaries in unrelated areas, like secretarial training is one that stands out to me. So they lacked focus, they were in a lot of debt, which was complicated by an economic downturn at the time, and a lawsuit where the franchisees felt that they were being charged too much for supplies. The company was believed to be on the verge of bankruptcy when he stepped down and sold his share of it for only $50,000. So in both cases, they were practically forced out of there on negative terms after making some sketchy and questionable decisions. But over at Waffle House, yet again, it is a completely different story. Well, technically, the founders Joe Rogers Sr. and Tom Forkner also stepped down from their positions in the early 1970s, but it was voluntarily on much better terms, and they remained involved until their deaths over 40 years later. Today, the families still own the majority of it, and Joe Rogers Jr. serves as chairman. Going back to the list, a much heavier comparison I want to at least mention is racism. Yeah, all three of them have been repeatedly accused of it over the years and sued multiple times for issues involving race. A few examples that stand out to me would be in 1994, Denny's agreed to pay a $54 million settlement to thousands of black customers that were refused service or forced to wait longer or pay more than white customers. In 2002, Waffle House had an out-of-court settlement in a case where employees at one of the restaurants refused to let in a group of black people, claiming it was closed for maintenance, but there were white people eating inside at the time. In 2018, a waitress at IHOP asked a group of black teenagers to pay up front. Seriously, just type in the name of the restaurant and the word racist into Google and you will get a lot of results. And obviously, a lot of it comes down to the individual restaurants and the people working at them, and there are levels of complexity to it, so I'm simply trying to convey that multiple occurrences have helped form reputations around these companies. I recommend doing some of your own research before forming any strong opinions here. Alright, moving on to a much more fun comparison, their signature foods. At Denny's, they have been serving up Grand Slams for almost 50 years now. In 1977, a Denny's in Atlanta, ironically not far from the Waffle House headquarters, introduced 2 pancakes, 2 eggs, 2 strips of bacon, and 2 sausages to honor the recent retirement of baseball player Hank Aaron, who had famously been a member of the Atlanta Braves. A few years later, in 1985, IHOP introduced what I'm going to call their signature food, the Rooty Tooty Fresh and Fruity, which realistically is almost the same thing as the Grand Slam. The only major difference is that the pancakes are topped with fruit, which is something that IHOP has always been known for. Going back to that first restaurant, one of the things that made it different was the various fruit-flavored syrups that they offered, so topping pancakes with strawberry, blueberry, peach, and cinnamon apple like this was very much in line with their brand. They even had a great ad campaign to go with it, where people would come into IHOP wearing ridiculous disguises because they were embarrassed to order something with the name Rooty Tooty Fresh and Fruity. Oh, and another notable difference from the Grand Slam is that the Rooty Tooty Fresh and Fruity is not always available. It comes back every so often for a limited time. Now, Waffle House does not really have a signature dish comparable to these other two. Being so much more traditional and straightforward, they have mostly avoided gimmicks and promotions. Seriously, the experience of eating at a Waffle House has changed very little from the beginning, so as boring as it might sound, I would say that that their signature food is in fact waffles. They claim to sell 124 million of them each year. My final comparison is going to be burgers, along with other non-breakfast menu items. IHOP and Waffle House started selling burgers at their first location, and Denny started doing it at their second location, so it is nothing new for any of them, but you'll notice that all the signature foods I just mentioned are for breakfast, so as you could imagine, it has been an ongoing struggle to get people to associate them with other meals. In the 1980s, when fast food restaurants were winning people over with their newer breakfast options, Denny's and IHOP responded by emphasizing their non-breakfast options. IHOP started serving steak and shrimp along with 15 other new dinner items, while Denny's started their jumbo burger promotion, and it has been ongoing ever since. In 2018, you might remember the whole IHOP situation where IHOP said that the P in their name was changing to a B, and everyone was speculating what the B stood for. Well, it turns out that the B stood for burgers, and it was essentially a gimmick to promote their new line of 7 ultimate steak burgers. In 2021, Denny's introduced an online virtual brand called Burger Den, along with the Meltdown to try to help non-breakfast item sales. Most recently, they introduced the Moz Pit Burger, which is a reference to a viral video involving them from 2013. Meanwhile, Waffle House, yet again, is different in that they do not really seem to care if people eat their burgers. They have always made them available, but as far as I can tell, have never gone out of their way to try to shift their customers' attention over to them. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about these 3 restaurants? Have I compared them sufficiently in the ways that matter the most, or do you know of any other areas that are worth exploring? Statistically, almost everybody watching this in the United States has been to at least 1 or 2 of these restaurants, so how do you compare them? Do you prefer one of them over the others, and what exactly makes it better? For me personally, I would have to say that those flavored syrups over at IHOP are a big advantage over the others, so what factors are most important to you? And any other thoughts you have about IHOP, Denny's, or Waffle House, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
I'll have the Rudy Tooty.
Thank you for watching.